What's one thing that every person in this room is going to become? Older. And most of us are scared stiff at the prospect. How does that word make you feel? I used to feel the same way. What was I most worried about? Ending up drooling in some grim institutional hallway. And then I learned that only 4% of older Americans are living in nursing homes, and the percentage is dropping. What else was I worried about? Dementia. Turns out that most of us can think just fine to the end. Dementia rates are dropping too. The real epidemic is anxiety over memory loss. I also figured that old people were depressed because they were old and they were going to die soon. It turns out that the longer people live, the less they fear dying, and that people are happiest at the beginnings and the ends of their lives. It's called the U-curve of happiness, and it's been borne out by dozens of studies around the world. You don't have to be a Buddhist or a billionaire. The curve is a function of the way aging itself affects the brain. So I started feeling a lot better about getting older, and I started obsessing about why so few people know these things. The reason is ageism, discrimination and stereotyping on the basis of age. We experience it anytime someone assumes we're too old for something, instead of finding out who we are and what we're capable of, or too young. Ageism cuts both ways. All isms are socially constructed ideas. Racism, sexism, homophobia, and that means we make them up, and they can change over time. All these prejudices pit us against each other to maintain the status quo, like auto workers in the US competing against auto workers in Mexico instead of organizing for better wages. We know it's not okay to allocate resources by race or by sex. Why should it be okay to weigh the needs of the young against the old? All prejudice relies on othering, seeing a group of people as other than ourselves, other race, other religion, other nationality. The strange thing about ageism, that other is us. Ageism feeds on denial, our reluctance to acknowledge that we are going to become that older person. It's denial when we try to pass for younger, or when we believe in anti-aging products, or when we feel like our bodies are betraying us simply because they are changing. Why on earth do we stop celebrating the ability to adapt and grow as we move through life? Why should aging well mean struggling to look and move like younger versions of ourselves? It's embarrassing to be called out as older until we quit being embarrassed about it. And it's not healthy to go through life dreading our futures. The sooner we get off this hamster wheel of age denial, the better off we are. Stereotypes are always a mistake, of course, but especially when it comes to age, because the longer we live, the more different from one another we become, right? Think about it. And yet, we tend to think of everyone in a retirement home as the same age, old. When they can span 4 decades, can you imagine thinking that way about a group of people from between the ages of 20 and 60? When you get to a party, you head for people your own age. Have you ever grumbled about entitled millennials? Have you ever rejected a haircut, or a relationship, or an outing because it's not age appropriate? For adults, there's no such thing. All these behaviors are ageist. We all do them, and we can't challenge bias unless we're aware of it. Nobody's born ageist, but it starts at early childhood. Around the same time, attitudes towards race and gender start to form, because negative messages about late life bombard us from the media and popular culture at every turn. Right? Wrinkles are ugly. Old people are pathetic. It's sad to be old. Look at Hollywood. A survey of recent Best Picture nominations found that only 12% of speaking or named characters were age 60 and up, and many of them were portrayed as impaired. Older people can be the most ageist of all because we've had a lifetime to internalize these messages and we've never thought to challenge them. I had to acknowledge it and stop colluding. Senior moment quips, for example, I stopped making them when it dawned on me that when I lost the car keys in high school, I didn't call it a junior moment. Like I stopped blaming my sore knee on being 64. My other knee doesn't hurt, and it's just as old. We are all worried about some aspect of getting older, whether running out of money, getting sick, ending up alone, and those fears are legitimate and real. But what never dawns on most of us is that the experience of reaching old age can be better or worse depending on the culture in which it takes place. It is not having a vagina that makes life harder for women, sexism. It's not loving a man that makes life harder for gay guys, it's homophobia. And it is not the passage of time that makes getting older so much harder than it has to be. It is ageism. When labels are hard to read, or there's no handrail, or we can't open the damn jar, we blame ourselves, our failure to age successfully, instead of the ageism that makes those natural transitions shameful and the discrimination that makes those barriers acceptable. You can't make money off satisfaction, but shame and fear create markets, and capitalism always needs new markets. Who says wrinkles are ugly? The multi-billion-dollar skincare industry. Who says perimenopause and low T and mild cognitive impairment are medical conditions? The trillion-dollar pharmaceutical industry. The more clearly we see these forces at work, the easier it is to come up with alternative, more positive, and more accurate narratives. Aging is not a problem to be fixed or a disease to be cured. It is a natural, powerful, lifelong process that unites us all. Changing the culture is a tall order, I know that, but culture is fluid. Look at how much the position of women has changed in my lifetime, or the incredible strides that the gay rights movement has made in just a few decades, right? Look at gender. We used to think of it as a binary, male or female, and now we understand it's a spectrum. It is high time to ditch the old-young binary too. There is no line in the sand between old and young after which it's all downhill. And the longer we wait to challenge that idea, the more damage it does to ourselves and our place in the world. Like in the workforce, where age discrimination is rampant. In Silicon Valley, engineers are getting Botox and hair plugged before key interviews. And these are skilled white men in their 30s, so imagine the effects further down the food chain. The personal and economic consequences are devastating. Not one stereotype about older workers holds up under scrutiny. Companies aren't adaptable and creative because their employees are young. They're adaptable and creative despite it. Companies, we know that diverse companies aren't just better places to work, they work better. And just like race and sex, age is a criterion for diversity. A growing body of fascinating research shows that attitudes towards aging affect how our minds and bodies function at the cellular level. When we talk to older people like this, or call them sweetie or young lady, it's called elder speak, they appear to instantly age, walking and talking less confidently. People with more positive feelings towards aging walk faster, they do better on memory tests, they heal quicker, and they live longer. Even with brains full of plaques and tangles, some people stayed sharp to the end. What did they have in common? A sense of purpose. And what's the biggest obstacle to having a sense of purpose in late life? A culture that tells us that getting older means shuffling off stage. That's why the World Health Organization is developing a global anti-ageism initiative to extend not just lifespan, but health span. Women experience the double whammy of ageism and sexism, so we experience aging differently. There's a double standard at work here, shocker. The notion that aging enhances men and devalues women. Women reinforce this double standard when we compete to stay young. Another punishing and losing proposition. Does any woman in this room really believe that she is a lesser version, less interesting, less fun in bed, less valuable than the woman she once was? This discrimination affects our health, our well-being, and our income, and the effects add up over time. They're further compounded by race and by class, which is why everywhere in the world, the poorest of the poor are old women of color. What's the takeaway from that map? By 2050, 1 out of 5 of us, almost 2 billion people, will be age 60 and up. Longevity is a fundamental hallmark of human progress. All these older people represent a vast, unprecedented, and untapped market. And yet, capitalism and urbanization have propelled age bias into every corner of the globe. From Switzerland, where elders fare the best, to Afghanistan, which sits at the bottom of the global Age Watch Index. Half of the world's countries aren't mentioned on that list because we don't bother to collect data on almost 2 million people because they're no longer young. Almost 2/3 of people over 60 around the world say they have trouble accessing health care. Almost 3/4 say their income doesn't cover basic services like food, water, electricity, and decent housing. Is this the world we want our children, who may well live to be 100, to inherit? Everyone, all ages, all genders, all nationalities, is old or future old. And unless we put an end to it, ageism will oppress us all. And that makes it a perfect target for collective advocacy. Why add another ism to the list when so many, racism in particular, call out for action? Here's the thing, we don't have to choose. When we make the world a better place to grow old in, we make it a better place in which to be from somewhere else, to have a disability, to be queer, to be non-rich, to be non-white. And when we show up at all ages, for whatever cause matters most to us, save the whales, save the democracy, we not only make that effort more effective, we dismantle ageism in the process. Longevity is here to stay. A movement to end ageism is underway. I'm in it, and I hope you will join me.
Hands up if ever any of you have ever knowingly or unknowingly, more likely in this case, even if it's just a joke, made like an ageist joke or had an ageist thought about yourself or someone else. Incredible, it's so pervasive and we think it's so harmless until we hear conversations like this, and then you realize how much we're all kind of guilty of this. And I think what's so valuable about an evening like tonight is that we have the ability to change our own ways of thinking and hopefully have those conversations with people around us. So I thought that was an excellent introduction to the conversation. So we're going to start with our panel tonight. And before each panelist, we're going to have a little video clip just to kind of frame the conversation. So the first clip tonight is ageism from a legal perspective. It's going to be a short clip, and then we'll have our first speaker speaking to the clip.
We asked people what they thought about ageism. What kind of discrimination is covered under the Human Rights Code of Canada?
Things to do with gender, ethnicity, education,
racism, disabilities.
Racism, sexism, homophobia.
And so religion, ethnic background, sex including your orientation.
Race or ethnicity or culture.
Gender-wise and
Your race or sexual identity or gender identity.
Racism and sexism.
Anything where you're discriminating against a certain group of people.
Did you know ageism is included?
No, I didn't.
Oh, that is interesting.
I did not know that actually.
Is it?
I did not know that ageism was included. I'm not aware of that. Is it?
I shouldn't be surprised, but I think that's a topic that's not covered a lot, and so it wouldn't be one that I would name like right off the top of my head.
Have you ever experienced ageism?
Yes, I have.
yes, actually.
As a mature student,
Some assumptions were made, I think, because of my age.
I wouldn't be able to apply for a certain number of jobs because I was too old.
I would like to introduce the first speaker of this evening. Mr. Jeff Palomar is a partner at Taylor McCaffrey, LLP. Jeff has been listed in the peer-selected best lawyers in Canada in his field. His practice includes labor relations, employment law, human rights and dispute resolution, and administrative law. I'd like to call Mr. Jeff Palomar to the stage. So come on.
Thank you, Danya. Thank you, everybody, for being here as well. I have 5 minutes, literally, to make you legal experts, so wish me luck. A few slides for you to start. The World Health Organization has a definition of ageism up on the slide there for you. Stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination towards people on the basis of age. Ageism, of course, starts from the perception that someone might be too old or too young to do something. So based on perception, not necessarily reality. Our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, our constitutional document that stands for all that's right in Canada, promotes equality, which of course would include equality and not being discriminated against on the basis of age. In Manitoba, we have the Human Rights Code, which provides for protection on various grounds, including age. It's illegal in Manitoba to discriminate against somebody on the basis of their age. That applies across the country, frankly, in all jurisdictions, with their various human rights legislation. And as I note on the slide, it's about balance, subject to bona fide occupational qualifications. As an example, in some circumstances, it can be legal to discriminate. If I'm hiring an airline pilot for my airline, I want someone who can see. That's legitimate. I can't not hire somebody because of his age, though, or her age. So as a lawyer to prepare for this, I naturally did some research. And I was quite pleased to see there's quite a lot out there, including in the mainstream media. And I came across an article on ageism in the Globe and Mail, which I found absolutely fascinating. Fascinating, too, for me, was that once you start thinking about something, you find it everywhere around you. You start noticing it everywhere. I think it's called the Gauder-Meinhof phenomenon, or the frequency bias, the idea that where you learn of something or recently become interested in something, you see it everywhere, which is really amazing. And this morning, there's something in the Free Press, as an example, promoting the 55-plus games in Swan River. Great opportunity for people at my level of life to start competing in sports, which is terrific. Anyway, I thought that was extremely positive because what it means is there's already a lot of people talking, thinking, or writing about ageism and getting older and how natural it is. It's a conversation that people are having, which is great. And I think the next challenge for us from a legal perspective is to get those who are not already part of the conversation to join in. And that's important because in the case of human rights violations, typically that occurs because of ignorance, in the sense that somebody doesn't know better. They haven't thought about it yet, they're not aware it's an issue. So the more education we can get, the more people we can get in the conversation, the better off we are. In the Globe and Mail article I saw, there was a quote in there talking about ageism, and the statement was, if you've seen one 80-year-old, well, you've seen one 80-year-old. Which I thought was absolutely brilliant, because it's true, you can't judge everybody by a label. You have to look at people as individuals. And that's part of human rights legislation and protection. You have to look at people as individuals, not as stereotypes, not by prejudging them based upon preconceptions. They are individuals, and they deserve that and have a legal entitlement to be treated that way. Treating somebody on the basis of a stereotype about what we presume them to be, what we presume they can do because of being a certain age, is exactly what ageism is all about. It's illegal, it's intellectually lazy, it's unfair, it's just wrong, it should not happen. And as my work as primarily an employment law lawyer, I see this discrimination, and let's call it as it is, that's what it is. It's discrimination, it's illegal. It's slamming the door of opportunity for a lot of people, for both employees and employers. It's stereotyping, it's assumptions, it's prejudice, and it's illegal, but it's also more than that. It's a shame because it's a wasted opportunity for so many people. So in my world, I see a lot of employment law cases dealing with ageism. How does this typically shake out? Well, denial of benefits as an example. I'll give you some cases just to explain how I see this in normal day-to-day living. One case involved two employees who applied for funding to go to a conference. The employer only had funding for one, as it turned out. One of them was 64 years old, the other was a lot younger. And the employer decided, I'm going to pick the younger one so I can get more bang for my buck. Didn't make any bones about it, no analysis, that was it. Simply chose the younger one because he thought that he would get more bang for his buck over time. Human rights complaint filed, successful. Can't do that. There was no analysis, no comprehension of why it might be appropriate to give the older person the opportunity. The assumption was made the person was going to retire in a year, why bother? And that's just wrong, it's simplistic. Assignment of work is another issue where we see this applying. Employee age 64 applies for a part-time job as a data attendant with a municipality. Got a conditional offer of employment, subject to passing some pre-employment tests. So far, so good. Fails the test, and the offer was withdrawn. So it brings a human rights complaint. And the employer argued that it had a responsibility to ensure no one employed there was a danger to himself. That makes sense. And so for safety reasons, though, put the applicant through some heart rate monitoring testing. because he wanted to make sure the employee was safe. The employer assumed that they had to do this aerobic testing because the employee was at a certain age and they were concerned about his heart. Okay, not an evil intention, but not necessarily well thought out. As it turned out, the assumptions were confirmed. The fellow's heart wasn't as good as a 25-year-old. Big deal. He was lifting boxes. He wasn't required to be running around. So they did the wrong testing altogether. What the results they received from the testing made no difference to the job. He was found to have been discriminated against because of his age and was successful in his claim. He got an award, $10,000 as general damages, got lost wages that he would have earned had he been placed in the job over 3 years before, and he was given the right to the job now, provided he could show that he was healthy enough to do it still. Mandatory retirement is another area where we see a lot of cases, a lot of disputes. A Manitoba court about 15 years ago agreed with an arbitrator that a collective agreement, which had mandatory retirement at age 65, was illegal, it's discriminatory. And interestingly, of course, a collective agreement is an agreement between a union and an employer. So they agreed that people had to retire at 65. Interesting. In another case, there was a 67-year-old employee who had exceptional performance under a series of term contracts. And the last term contract was about to expire and wasn't going to be renewed because the employer had decided supposedly to restructure things and downgrade that position. So the 67-year-old said, I still like working. I'm going to apply for the new job, even though it's a lesser job. Didn't get it. Employer then posts for a brand new job, which remarkably is like the one she had before. She doesn't even bother applying, she just files a human rights complaint. And is successful because it's very clear that the employer was getting rid of her and changed the jobs around because it didn't want her as a quote, older person in that position. She got $15,000 in general damages as well as 5 years of back wages. Pretty substantial. So the system works, in my respectful view. And again, from my experience as a practicing lawyer, the law and the legal system, it's based on and reflects what society wants. And impacts society by informing it through court cases like the ones I mentioned, of new or changed realities and obligations. Things evolve, things change. What we saw years ago are not necessarily what we see today. The law changes, attitudes change, things improve, which is good. What was acceptable within the narrow confines of yesterday becomes unacceptable today. Not just because the law arbitrarily says it's different today. It's because people have thought about things and they wanted to make changes, which is positive. So to my mind, the broader the conversation we can have, the better. And the more events we can have like this, the better. We have a present reality where there is lots of baby boomers who are really, really interested in this topic nowadays because they are living it, and that's terrific because it brings many, many more people to the conversation, and I think that's a good thing. And when Roger Daltrey sings talking about my generation nowadays, I suspect he's got a whole different perspective than he did 50-odd years ago when he sang it the first time. So things are changing, things are evolving, which is great. I am extremely positive about what the future's going to bring. I think we're in an exciting time, and I'm very positive about it, very optimistic. And as someone said, age is a case of mind over matter. If you don't mind, it really doesn't matter. Thank you.
So that was the first segment, the legal perspective when it comes to ageism. Our second clip, which will frame the second part of this evening's panel discussion, is older adults and the healthcare system.
We asked people what they thought about older adults in terms of healthcare. Who do you think is using the most healthcare dollars in the province?
Probably the elderly. Maybe I would say over 65.
65 plus.
I would probably say our elderly population, because as you age, there's just a lot of more health complications that you come across.
You get older and they come to face more greater risk for health problems and injuries.
Probably our aging population is using a good number of dollars.
Who do you think is going to the emergency room the most?
Probably say like really little kids and really old people.
Old people, I guess, like their organs and stuff.
I do think it's the older generation. When I go there, I usually see people of all ages.
Probably seniors.
The elderly, the dying.
Something scary can happen to you, and the same can happen if you're older.
Dr. St. John is also a consulting geriatrician for the Winnipeg Regional Health Authority. He's an affiliate of the Centre on Aging at the University of Manitoba. Dr. St. John.
Thanks. So there's always a lot of gloom and doom about the healthcare system and the older population going to bankrupt the healthcare system. But I think it's important that we realize that we're pretty much the healthiest population anywhere ever. So when we're wringing our hands, we do have to think about, am I too tall for this? Sorry. I was saying, there's a lot of gloom and doom about the aging population going to bankrupt the healthcare system, but it's worth noting we're the healthiest population anywhere ever, almost. So being an aging population is actually a tribute to something that's happened in society that allows us to age and live long and healthy lives. And that's actually unusual in world history. It's actually quite a new phenomenon. So it's actually a huge success of the modern world that we're aging. So just to address some of the points in the video directly, the first point they made is aging is going to bankrupt the healthcare system, and that's just factually incorrect. So these are data from CIHI, the Canadian Institute for Health Information, and it's important to note that the aging population is responsible for some of the increased healthcare costs, but really only a very small proportion. Most of the increase in healthcare cost is unrelated to the aging population. It's related to changes in the way we deliver healthcare. There are some exceptions to that, notably long-term care. So long-term care does seem to be more age-dependent than some of the other sectors, and the other sector is home and domiciliary services. So things like home care and home care services are actually quite strongly driven by age, but most of the healthcare is not driven by an aging population. So when we say that the aging population is going to bankrupt the healthcare system, that's just factually incorrect. Now, the healthcare system does have to adapt to an aging population, to be sure, and there are things that we do have to do as a healthcare system to deal with an aging population, but it's certainly not going to bankrupt the healthcare system. So the other funny thing, this is a slide from the 1840s. So again, this notion of a life course is actually not a new one, that as we go through life, we change and our needs change. It is kind of ageist, and it is kind of funny. You can see at the top, the guy at the top of life, the tip of his game, and it's going up and up and up, is 50. So when I was choosing slides for this talk, I chose this slide, and my daughter said that this looks like a picture that's written by a 50-year-old man. And being a 50-year-old man, it's like, heck yeah, that's awesome. So the notion is that we hit our peak at 50, and then it's downhill from there on in. And that's not really the case. So we do change as we get older, but it doesn't necessarily lead to disability and death. The other interesting thing is, even in 1848, when this was drawn, people were living to 100. So exceptional long lives goes back to Roman times. There were cemeteries in Rome from 200 AD of 100-year-olds. So there were very, very few centenarians in ancient times, but they were there. So that's another important point. Now this is a slide directly cut and pasted from the World Health Organization report on aging, and any of you who are interested in it, I highly recommend reading it. It's quite a simple read, and there are lay summaries of it. And it talks about how the healthcare system should adapt to an aging population. And one of the key points they make is that health in late life is dependent upon several things. One of the key determinants is how healthy we are in midlife. So it's like a health bank. The more health you put in the bank, the less likely you're to go bankrupt as you decline. So if you're healthier in midlife, it does tend to lead to a healthier late life. The second important point is that slowing the decline in an organ function, and there is a bit of a decline in organ function as we age, but if we can slow that decline, we then have a healthier late life. The third key point that the World Health Organization makes is that bottom dotted line, is that we need to adapt our society and our healthcare system so that all people of all abilities are included. So that at the same level of functional status, people with levels of disability can be included and lead long and healthy lives despite the disability. So we need to adapt our society to first prevent late life disability, and secondly, to adapt society to deal with disability so that people with disabilities are included, not excluded. So that's another key point. And then the last point that I just flipped past, there we go. This is to echo the TED Talk, but it's actually an important point. So we think that everything gets worse with aging, and that's not the case. A lot of cognitive functions get better with aging, so accumulated wisdom increases with age, judgment tends to increase with age, insight tends to increase with age. So everything I said was just ageist. but psychological studies show that vocabulary increases and quite a few things actually get better with age, and including into very late life. The other thing that does happen is happiness tends to get better in late life. So it starts out high, and it's this U-shaped curve that was noted in the TED Talk. And it's actually interesting that this is seen in almost all societies throughout the world. So sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, South Asia, East Asia, Europe, North America. The only place it isn't true seems to be the former Soviet bloc, where it seems like everybody's just unhappy all the time. But it does seem that as we get older, we get happier. And it's funny, because this is the exact converse of that former, when we go up and up and up, and hit our peak at 50. In fact, it's our nadir for life happiness at 50. So it's an interesting phenomenon. So the notion that older people are not satisfied with life is just factually incorrect, unless you're like my daughters and think 50 is old. But in general, the older we get, the happier and more satisfied we get. So that's a key point as well. So again, just to summarize, an aging population is actually a tribute to the society we've lived in. And as long as we deal with things correctly, an aging population is not going to collapse the world like a lot of people think, nor is it going to collapse the healthcare system like a lot of people think.
Time to introduce the third clip of the evening, and this clip is called Sexual Activity and Older Adults, the 60-second mistake.
We asked people what they thought about older adults' sexual activity. Do you think your grandparents or parents are still sexually active?
I don't know.
Probably.
Yes.
I suspect they probably, yeah.
Probably, unfortunately.
I don't really want to think about it. I think so.
I do not believe so.
Because, age.
What percentage of older adults do you think contract STDs?
Similar to the rest of the Canadian population?
I don't know, 10%?
Like 40%?
I would say less than 25.
50. I would think that older people would know better, but I guess maybe growing up they wouldn't have had the same education.
At what age do you think people stop having sex?
I never really thought about it before.
If you reach a point where you're physically not capable of doing so. People are human beings who enjoy sex, so I don't know if that really ends at any point. I think that should be something you experience all throughout your life.
Maybe when a woman hits menopause?
40, probably.
Wow. I'm going to introduce our third speaker who will speak to this segment of the evening, Dr. Laurie Cos. Dr. Cos is the co-founder of both the Independent Healthcare Network and the Canadian Counselling and Resource Centre. Dr. Cos specialises in medical systems development, disability management and occupational health. Dr. Cos.
Good evening, everybody. I'm not lazy, I'm just short, so I've chosen to speak to you tonight from a seated position. And this also explains the reason why I did not become a surgeon, because I would have had to stood on a stool for hours on end, and I don't think that would end well. So I get what one might call the fun topic of the evening, and so I'd like to talk to you about the topic that's often overlooked, and that is the fact that we often do not consider the process of aging and sex in the senior. An important part of that discussion is what I call the 60-second mistake. Society generally does not do a good job at educating our younger population about sexual health and sexually transmitted diseases, birth control, etc. This is primarily done through the school systems these days, at home, healthcare providers, as well as through public service announcements. Unfortunately, this does not apply to our senior population, given the taboos that exist around older adults having or engaging in sexual activity. We perceive that with age comes wisdom, but not necessarily so in regard to sexual activity and health in our senior population. The older adult and sexually transmitted diseases likely recalls these diseases as venereal diseases. Now they're called sexually transmitted infections or sexually transmitted diseases, but the term venereal diseases has gone the way of the dinosaur for the most part. STDs include syphilis, gonorrhea, HIV, HPV, which is human papillomavirus, and chlamydia. There are a few more, but we'll stick to those given our time constraints. It's interesting that Harvard University reports that cases of chlamydia have nearly doubled among individuals between the ages of 55 and 64 between 2012 and 2016. The incidence of STDs in the senior population has risen more quickly over the past few years than in any other age group. Society often feels that our senior population ages out of sexual desire and interest in sexual activity. This has not proven to be the case. 60% of individuals over age 60 have sexual relations at least once per week. The need for intimacy and sexual activity does not decline with age, although it may take on many different forms depending upon illness and physical impairment as we age. Why are older adults at increased risk for sexually transmitted diseases, you might wonder? Well, often we see people losing a spouse and having to re-enter the dating game, so to speak, when they are ready to do so. We also have something that maybe Mr. Palomar sees more often than I do, which is gray divorce in your office. And unfortunately, people may assume that they are in a long-term monogamous relationship, when in fact one partner may be cheating or have many sexual partners, and the primary partner to whom they may be married to or living common law with has no idea about the fact that they are truly at risk for a sexually transmitted disease. Why should we be concerned about controlling STDs, as the commercial says, at my age? As we age, our immune systems are weakened over time. While older women are no longer concerned about getting pregnant, postmenopausally, there is decreased vaginal lubrication and a thinning of the vaginal wall. This leads to micro tears in the vagina, and as a result, it is easier for bacteria to enter the vagina, the bloodstream. With the advent of drugs like Cialis and Viagra, men have the ability to remain sexually active with a variety of partners for a much longer period of time, thereby increasing the risk for both contracting and spreading STDs. Dry hand syndrome here. So screening for STDs. Dating practices and rituals have undergone enormous changes since our older adults first dated. Swiping right on a dating app can expose the older adult not only to multiple partners, but also to multiple diseases. Older adults may perceive that only intercourse puts them at risk for a sexually transmitted illness. They are reticent to discuss their sexual activity and health with their healthcare providers. And healthcare providers are often failed to broach the subject of sexual health with their patients because there are often many more chronic diseases such as diabetes, heart disease, lung disease, cancer that take up bulk of medical appointments. However, we can test for sexually transmitted diseases, and it isn't all that difficult. Simple swabs and blood tests can be done to check patients for sexually transmitted diseases on a timely and routine basis, and that, of course, depends on the individual's history. We don't. But going forward, we need to know our patients, and we need to know what they're at risk for. Remember that STDs, especially at the outset, may have no symptoms. So it is important to realize that if left unchecked and untested, we face increased morbidity and mortality as a result of these diseases. So, in my mind, the best treatment for sexually transmitted diseases is prevention. And that is, don't make the 60-second mistake to which I referred. Use latex condoms and talk to your healthcare provider about your sexuality. And with that, I thank you.
What words would you use to describe an older person?
They're wise. It's wrinkly and they have glasses. They don't walk really good. Their skin is not as smooth as they used to be. They lose their hair, gray hair sometimes. Wrinkly in their veins pop out in gray hair. They might need hearing aids.
The term gray would be a good one, from their hair to maybe the mood that they could be in.
Sometimes their age goes over 100. They move a little slower, so yeah. They need canes, someone you can look up to. And sometimes some people have beards or mustaches. They're skinnier. They have really good stories to tell. Kind. Sometimes they knit. It's good. Sometimes old people fought in the war.
They would be someone of to give higher respect to. That's how I would look at them.
They're great role models.
They're also mostly really nice.
Sometimes they're heroes.
If you were asked to draw a picture of an older person, what would it look like? And, or what would the person be doing?
I might draw somebody using a walker, wrinkly skin, and their eyes droopy.
I would draw someone with gray hair, eyeglasses, wrinkles.
This one has glasses and a bow tie and a vest. And I would draw their neck is a little smaller. I made lots of wrinkles.
I would draw an old lady with gray hair sitting on the rocking chair, knitting.
So cute and yet so offensive. I'm going to ask my final speaker to come and join us, but I want to introduce you to Dr. Alexander Siegel, a Professor Emeritus, Senior Scholar in Health Sociology and a Research Affiliate at the Center on Aging at the University of Manitoba. Dr. Siegel is the author of 3 books and numerous scientific publications in the field of health and aging. Dr. Siegel.
Thank you, Nadia. I'm pleased to be with you this evening. And as you just saw in the last video, certain stereotypical beliefs about older adults are clearly learned early in life. The task that I've been given this evening is to provide you with an overview of the topic of ageism and to hopefully try to tie together some of the ideas that you've been exposed to both in the TED Talk and in the previous speakers. One of the key questions that's interested me for some time is, why does ageism still persist? There are now more Canadians over the age of 65 than there are under the age of 15. There are also an increasing number of older adults who do not fit the stereotype, but it hasn't changed. Ageism has been characterized as a major threat to aging well in the 21st century. However, and again I'm repeating, the aging of society has not yet significantly changed our beliefs about older adults. Later life is still typically associated with physical and mental decline, the loss of productivity and independence, and concerns about older adults becoming a burden both on families, the healthcare system, and society in general. As you saw earlier in the slide with the World Health Organization definition of ageism, there are three major components to ageism. Wrong direction? Okay. The three dimensions are the stereotype, prejudice, and discrimination. And I want to just add a little bit to our understanding of these terms. Stereotype refers to generalized beliefs that we hold, or how we think about older adults, who we typically lump together in one category. The following images reveal some of our implicit stereotypical beliefs about older adults. You may or may not see yourself in these. The media is full of examples. One of my other favorite sources is, you notice when you're looking for birthday cards or greeting cards how ageist so many of them are. Like, I sent one to a brother-in-law, happy birthday, you finally look as old as you really are. That kind of stuff. Prejudice refers to the attitudes we have, or how we feel about older adults. Here's a couple of examples. I'll let you read it for yourself, but there are many more that we could have included. The third component refers to our behavior, particularly discriminatory behavior, as you heard about from Jeff before. It's how we act towards older adults. The Human Rights Code that was also discussed earlier distinguishes between three types of discrimination, as I said, under the Human Rights Code. The one that we're most focused on this evening is differential treatment, which refers to the case in which an individual is treated differently based on generalizations about the group to which they belong or are thought to belong as older adults. It's also important to recognize that there are different levels of ageism. Typically, we distinguish between the interpersonal or individual and the institutional. And I'll give you some examples. Individual or interpersonal is how we treat older adults in everyday social interaction. For example, and you may have many of your own, speaking more loudly when you're talking to an older adult because you assume they must be hard of hearing, right? It's ageism. Institutional is how older adults are treated by society's major social institutions, such as the healthcare system that Phil told you a little bit before. I'm going to share a personal example with you now that I think illustrates both levels of ageism. 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with an aggressive form of prostate cancer. After having been given the diagnosis, the options were then discussed or presented to me in terms of treatment. Surgery, chemo, radiation. And as I was sitting there trying to process all of this, I was taken aback because the physician then said, but we don't generally do surgery on men over 70. Turning 71 at that point, I said, we need to talk. He said, calm down. He then referred me to somebody for the surgery. I saw the urologist who was going to be doing the surgery. But it also happened to be summer. And I waited and waited and waited and became increasingly concerned about what was happening, so I went to see him. Basically, he told me it's summer holidays, hospital staff, the anesthesiologists were on holidays, we're running a little bit late, at which point I said something like, if you can reassure me the cancer is also taking a summer holiday, then I might be willing to wait. Otherwise, I want to know, what am I waiting for? At which point he said, well, I don't schedule the surgery. Go talk to my booking list. This conversation took place, interestingly enough, in a fairly crowded reception area, a waiting area. At which point I said to her, hey, you know the pathology report, you know it's urgent, etc. Why the delay? Ready for the response I got? If you were 40, it would be more serious. So for me, it really brought home age-based discrimination. Stereotypical beliefs about later life, as I've said before, persist. But why? I think there are a variety of reasons. First and most important is that ageism is deeply embedded in our cultural views and practices. Beliefs about older adults are learned, as you saw early in life. They're shared by people of all ages, including many older adults. Furthermore, stereotypical beliefs are constantly reinforced in everyday life. And there are many, many examples. Cartoons, jokes, greeting cards, the media. I'm always struck by the fact that when I see an article that says some unfortunate older adult was struck by a vehicle crossing the street, it not only puts their age, it says an elderly woman, an elderly man. Meaning what? Our everyday language also contributes to the perpetuation of stereotypes. And I'm going to give you just a couple of examples, although there are many. There are some seemingly innocent but ageist terms. Little old lady, old timer, plus other terms that are more pejorative, such as over the hill, an old geezer. Plus, you're probably all familiar with common expressions or idioms such as, and I know you've all heard this one, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. What does that mean? Right? And there are ageist jokes, which I'm hesitant to tell, perpetuating the stereotype, but here goes. Again, I bet you know many of these. You know you're getting older when you can fill it in. When your back goes up more often than you do. When your knees buckle but your belt won't. Turn this into a stand-up routine. I'm just going, no. Okay, think back to Ashton Applewhite video you saw at the start. When in passing, she referred to an experience most, if not all of us, have had. When you or somebody you know walk into the room, starts to speak to you and says, about what I was going to say. And then quickly dismisses the situation by saying, I must be having a senior moment. Right? Again, why do we say that? What does it mean? And doesn't it contribute to perpetuating the stereotype that all older adults have memory issues? And you've heard there's evidence that's to the contrary. Why are we reluctant to become our future selves? What are we afraid that aging may bring? Here are some examples of things that the stereotype perpetuates in terms of what we associate with later life. Ageism seems to be, for some reasons, more resistant to change than sexism and racism. And I would suggest it's because stereotypical beliefs about older adults are taken for granted. They're generally accepted. They're often dismissed as humorous comments. I was just kidding. Just joking. But even more importantly, I think it's because we're less inclined to correct them when we hear somebody saying something that we think is ageist, or in everyday life acting in a way we think is ageist. We're more reticent to correct them. Why? Well, because we falsely believe that they're not particularly hurtful or harmful, and yet, I assure you, they are. Ashton suggests that the aging that we experience depends on the social, well, she talks about the cultural, but I'm going to expand it, say it depends on the social structure of the society in which we live, as well as our cultural context. Our culture, as you all well know, is highly youth-oriented. We emphasize a performance orientation. It's more important, doing is more important than being. We highly prize independence and productivity. And we tend, unfortunately, to equate work with worth. So that once you retire and you go to the paid labor force, somehow you are worth less. It's time to challenge ageist beliefs. We know from study after study after study, many of them done by the Center on Aging at our University of Manitoba, that the majority of older Manitobans are aging successfully. They live in the community. They report that they're in good health. They're physically active. They're socially engaged. They contribute to society through informal social support, both for their children, for their friends, grandchildren, and they also contribute through a wide variety of voluntary activities. A couple of media clippings. These are headlines from media articles about active older adults. And again, I'm trying to get you to think about how we can challenge the stereotype and the role of the media in perpetuating these. They're all about 80 and 90-year-olds who are physically active. What do they have in common? Why are these activities newsworthy? I mean, if the last one was 46-year-old celebrates birthday by going skating, would it make the newspaper? Obviously not. But here it says, still skating at 96, go figure. Well, these are all exceptional individuals, but equally, and perhaps more important, they're challenging our age-based behavioral expectations about how one should behave when you're 70, when you're 80, when you're 90. These are all people who are unexpectedly active for their age. I gave a talk a number of years ago where I was talking about language, and this reminds me of it because I was using terms like spry. What does spry mean? We use it when we refer to an older adult who's more active than you thought. What does precocious mean? It means a young person who knows more or seems more knowledgeable than you would expect for their age. At which point I said, well, I'd like to think that I have really precocious, really spry grandchildren who have a really precocious grandfather. Just as a way of getting to think about how we use the language without thinking great things about it. We need to recognize that while these individuals are exceptional, they're part of a growing trend. And it was Jeff who referred to the insert in today's paper, the 55 plus games. This is becoming more the norm than an exception. So I want to end by talking a little bit more about healthy, active aging. And unlike the stereotypical images I started you with, I'm finishing off with some images of real-life older adults aging well. The last one's my favorite. In closing, I want to stress that ageism marginalizes older adults. We need to address the fact that there is considerable social, psychological, and physical diversity among those who may be anywhere from 55 to 105 and yet are all characterized as older adults. And that was one of Ashton's messages today. It's time to correct persistent myth understandings about later life. And I want to leave you with a question for you to think about. I have a birthday coming up, beginning of May. I will be turning 76. A comment that I hear from time to time is, wow, you look pretty good for your age. The question then is that a compliment or an ageist insult? Thank you.
We are going to play one more video, very short, and then we're going to open up the floor to you. So if there have been questions that you've kind of come to the forefront of your mind during the course of the evening, you will have some time and opportunity to engage with our panelists. We'll have about 10, 12 minutes for that. But I do want to introduce the final video of the evening, which is called What Do Older Adults Need to Age Well?
Tell us about the aging process from your perspective.
You're very lucky if you get the opportunity.
Well, aging is a natural process. We can't do anything about it. We have to stay and connected with our friends, family, and do as many activities as we can.
We're all very uniquely different. Some of us have the glass half full. Some of us say, oh, it's half empty. All this is based on our health and wellness.
You have to be positive. I mean, if you're not, then you just go downhill so fast.
Have you ever been in a situation where you felt you were treated differently based on your age?
I really feel that, and people at grocery stores and people that I generally meet seem to be quite pleasant.
I can only relate to personal experience I had with my mother-in-law. We were shopping one day, and she said, help me find an outfit for this occasion. And I did. I took her to a couple of stores. And this one time, a clerk was talking solely to me. And I felt very sorry for my mother-in-law because this clerk was not talking to my mother-in-law who was looking for a specific item. So I said, please look at me, look at my mother-in-law. She's the one that's buying the outfit. And that was the time I felt very, very much discrimination.
I really can't say that because I look so much younger than I am.
Has anyone ever told you that you were too old to do something you want to do?
Oh, my children do that all the time. But I don't listen. I just do what I want to do, and I just tell them that, you know, someday you'll be my age, and hopefully my grandchildren will be doing the same thing to you.
I find a lot of younger people try and take care of you. For an example, watch your step, Mom. Take it easy, Mom.
Not really, but I do whatever I want if I can do it.
I think we've turned into the protected rather than the protector as we started our lives off.
I'm mobile, and life's good.
What do people need to age well?
I think maybe first is health, because it's very important in life. Friends, good friends around yourself, myself. Money is important too. Very important is trust.
I think we need to engage in activities and socialize all according to our health. And that helps us age well.
We need a positive attitude, and we have to do a lot of exercising, art, whatever you can do, maybe, and laughter is very important.
Friends, finances, activities, health, and the opportunities to be mobile, I think.
In a nutshell, I would like to say in such a way, all we need is love.
Let's have a chance for some dialogue now, some engagement, conversations, questions. We've heard from so many interesting panelists today with thoughts on different aspects of aging and ageism. We have about 10 or 12 minutes to have this conversation, and we have people walking around the room. If you have a question for our panelists, you could just put your hand up and take advantage. We have one question over here. If you could just specify who you want to direct the question to as well, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. It's for anyone on the panel. I have a question whether or not, if you change the model of care for the older people in long-term care, from this medical model to the social care model that we use for children, would we be further ahead in eliminating ageism and the resulting caregiving that is a more protector than one that advocates living well to the end?
Thank you for your question. Is there someone who wants to... do we have a mic there?
Yes, it's up here. Well, one of the issues is, you know, we need to incorporate both medical and social and functional models. I think for quite a while we've been functioning in the biomedical model that ignores a lot of the social and psychological aspects of health. And I think that's been a quite great mistake. We've ignored social connectedness, social interaction, social engagement, and that's been a distinct problem, to be sure. The issue is in long-term care, a lot of people do have significant health problems. So to have a strictly social model with no health probably won't end well either. So I think what we need is not a social model and not a biomedical model, but we do need to have a blend that acknowledges medical, social, psychological, and functional all at the same time. We can't dichotomize those. I think every time somebody tries to dichotomize healthcare and compartmentalize it and ignore social factors, it becomes a big problem. But conversely, I think we run a risk if we ignore the health issues that exist in people who are generally unwell enough to need long-term care. Does that answer the question?
Sure, thank you.
Hi, my name is Ellie Paslick. I'm with Rainbow Resource Center. For Jeff Palmer, please. One of your slides said that the process of filing a human rights complaint is very slow and expensive. How does someone afford that process in filing a complaint when they don't have the financial resources to begin with?
Fair question. The issue more so is time, I have to say. Just to be clear, when it goes to the Human Rights Commission, there's no cost for filing a complaint there. It goes to court afterwards. If there's a decision rendered and someone chooses to take that decision to court and try and get a court to judicially review that, then there's a cost involved at that stage, of course. But the commission itself is free, which is terrific. But the problem is our legal system doesn't move quite as quickly as you see on TV in terms of law shows. Typically, with the Human Rights Commission, if a complaint is filed, it will be about anywhere from 12 to 18 months before it's actually investigated. Then there is a report which is written. Ultimately, it can go to a hearing, but that can be 4 to 5 years down the road. And if somebody is at a certain stage in their life, they may have other priorities as opposed to waiting for the justice system to unfold. So that's a challenge, certainly.
Thank you, Jeff. Any other questions? Okay, one at the back, yes.
My name is Nancy Hanson. I teach at University of Manitoba in the Disability Studies program, and it strikes me how many parallels there are between ageism and ableism. They're almost exactly the same. So I think it would be great if we could sort of meld ideas together, because there are over 1.3 billion disabled people in the world, and many of them are aging. And it would be nice if we could develop social citizenship around positivity.
A great comment, thank you for that. Any other questions or comments? Yes, one in the row there.
Hi, thank you. My name is Wendy Shetler. I'm actually the CEO of the Alzheimer's Society, and I'm here with my mom today. One of the questions, one of the things I hear frequently is about successful aging. And it concerns me a little bit because it makes me think of the people so that, maybe aren't aging successfully. And so that, in my opinion, further stigmatizes them. So somebody with dementia who can live well for a very long time, now with this diagnosis of whatever, they are now seen as not aging successfully anymore. And now there's no part of, there's no place for them in the conversation. So I just want to kind of hold that up for a thought.
It's an excellent point. Do we have anyone on the panel who would like to speak to that? I think this game where we pass the mic down and whoever.
No, I would actually strongly agree with that. I think there's several issues with the term successful aging. One is who's doing the defining. I think often the definition of successful aging is defined by academics and physicians who incorporate a highly health-related concept. When you actually ask older people what successful aging is, and there are surveys that have done that, notably, the Manitoba follow-up study here in Winnipeg, you get a much more heterogeneous definition of what successful aging is that changes over time in the person who's doing the defining. So I think one is who gets to define aging as successful. Two, what do you do with the people who aren't aging successfully, because then you further stigmatize that. And I think one of the nice things about the World Health Organization report is that it acknowledges that not all of us will be healthy for all of our life. And in fact, most of us will acquire chronic illness, and most of us will acquire disability. So we need to focus not only on trying to prevent those if we can, and I assume most of us want that, but also to incorporate a society, to have a society that incorporates people of all levels of cognition and all levels of functional status without stigmatizing people who don't. I think all of us want to be the 97-year-old who's running the marathon. That's not true. Most of us want to be that person. But most of us won't be. So hopefully we'll live in a society that will accept things and incorporate people, not just the healthiest people, but the less healthy people as well. Alex probably wants to comment on that. We've had this back and forth before.
Thanks, Phil. I just want to add a couple of quick comments to it. I am one of those academics, although retired, but I've worked in the field of health and aging for decades. I don't use the term successful aging. And the reason I don't is, what's the opposite? That you failed. I think it's much more important to think about the notion of aging well, given your life circumstances, so that if you do have a physical disability or a cognitive disability, whatever, there are still things that could be done to help you to be the best you can and to help you to age well, given whatever the limitations are.
And I think one of the other things we forget is that we're aging from the time we're born. And the abilities that we have are very important throughout the entire life cycle. So at any point in time, if you lose cognitive ability, if you lose the ability to walk, to socialize, to be independent in driving or taking transit, all of those things are very significant, and they're not related to any particular age. So we have to think about how do we put ability back in the word disability and focus more on that than on the this part, disability. So I urge you to think about that, because it is very relevant when we're looking to help people get back into a workplace if they've had an illness, helping somebody who might be all of 15 or 20 to stay active and to be part of society and to be able to develop the friendships that we have all talked about today as being so important in life. So that is my comment, in having worked in the area of disability for so many years. And if anybody has any questions on that line, I'd be happy to continue.
Okay. My name is Eric Fillion. I'm a social worker, so you know where I'm coming from with this. My question is a little bit more about the prejudices and the way we view older people in society, and how, what you guys' opinion is on programs that we have for the elderly, not elderly, but like retirement at 65, so you get CPP, you get your OAS, you get your GIS, all that kind of stuff at 65. You're supposed to get your pension at 65, and if you push it back to 70, you get premiums. But for the most part, it's kind of looked up as 65 is the day that you stop working and you join a different segment of the population, which doesn't have any productive value, so to speak, right? So do you think that these institutions that we have put in since the 50s and 40s are now kind of hindering how we view older people and what their abilities are in a sense? And so these systems kind of change to reflect the new norm of society where people are retiring at an older age, like 75, 80 kind of thing? What's your opinion on this and how it affects people?
Thank you for your question. Who would like to take that one?
Okay, to answer the question, I think we have to pull it apart because you combined a couple of things. Mandatory retirement is one issue. It's a historical fact that we lived with for many years at a time when life expectancy was shorter. And many jurisdictions now have eliminated mandatory retirement. And so I'm a big fan of, acknowledge the experience and wisdom that comes with age, and people should work as long as they're able to and they feel they're still contributing. The other side of the coin, though, is CPP, OAS, social programs. I don't think that contributes to ageism. It plays a vital role because it provides a social safety net, particularly for those older adults who do need the support. Because one of the components of aging well for all of us is financial security. So I think that on the one hand, being able to work or being forced out of the workplace is very different than a society that puts in place, as I said, a social safety net for those at a certain age or stage or based on their health status might need some additional supports.
If I can just add, I completely agree with what was just said. I could say as well from an employment perspective, people are not assumed or expected to work until 65. Everyone has their own timeline, it seems. And as someone who may be advising an employer in terms of expectations moving forward, you can't assume it's going to be 65. It could be anything. I see many people reinvent themselves at 65 or 70 or 75. Lawyers don't seem to want to stop practicing law for whatever reason, and they hang around in some capacity or reinvent themselves to do something else. And a lot of my younger colleagues seem to go through a myriad of different careers over the course of a long working life. So 65 is a number. That's all it is. Nothing more, nothing less, in my respect for you.
I was quite taken by Dr. Segal's comment about how he was discriminated against about his cancer. And 30 plus years of funeral service, I've heard all these horror stories about how mom or dad or whoever had been discriminated against, and families always felt that there was this issue, that part of that problem that they've had in the healthcare system and its ultimate, their ultimate death was because of the attitudes towards their mom or dad or whoever, because of the healthcare system. The question is this, that it's kids that are having to deal with this issue. And do you think there's going to be a tipping point of baby boomers who have seen what's happened to their parents, where it's going to get to the point that the baby boomers are going to want to have it almost like a reconciliation, to deal with it at that level, with that visceral anger, and make it come forward saying enough is enough, we're not going to put up with this garbage anymore.
That's a hard one, actually, to give you a succinct answer to. I think what it's really going to take is not just individuals having this kind of negative experience and their children or grandchildren or whoever deciding something needs to be done. I think we all need to do something. I think we can all be social advocates. And I think that one of the things that is really going to take, and I'm going to take you back to the TED Talk, one of the oddities about ageism that Ashton talked about is that typically when you think about racism, there's another group. Right? When you think about sexism, there's another group. There is no other group here. It's you, your aged parents now, you in the future. We're all aging, and Phil has told me on a number of occasions it beats the alternative. Right? So aging should be a positive in all of our lives. But I think that what it's really going to take is for young people to realize that if they do age, this is part of their future, and they need to prepare for it rather than deny. Right? It's happening to someone else. It is going to happen to all of us as we age. And I think it's going to take that level of realization, plus, as you said, some of those real life experiences that get people concerned enough to act.
So it's very hard not to be labeled if you want to be an active participant in helping those that you care for, get the best help that's out there. So I think it's something that we need to address as a society, and we need to look at, not everything about our healthcare system is negative, and I think we have to start talking more about the things that are positive, and also balancing that with the things that are negative, and seeing exactly where the scale balances out. So I'll just leave it at that.